Hey guys, my name is William Owens, and I want to thank you so much for joining me on my very first YouTube video ever. For my first video, I wanted to do a challenge. I wanted to see whether or not you can beat Pokemon FireRed with a team of only Caterpie and Weedle. But before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Madrybread. He does these sort of Pokemon challenges every single week, and he was an inspiration for this video, so definitely go check out his page, link in the description. Now, in terms of base stats, Caterpie and Weedle are pathetically weak, with a base stat of only 195 each, which actually makes them just slightly higher than Sunkern, the weakest Pokemon until Generation 7, and lower than Magikarp due to its high speed and defense stats. But what I think makes this challenge especially difficult are their movesets. Caterpie can only learn Tackle as its only attacking move, and Weedle can only learn Poison Sting. Neither of them can learn any TM moves or HM moves, so it's going to be very difficult to do any damage, especially in the later game. From the very start, I decided to pick Bulbasaur as my starter. That way my rival would be given a Charmander, making this already difficult challenge that much harder. There wasn't much to cover in the early game. I basically just sped through it until I got to the Viridian Forest. From there, I was going to catch a bunch of different Caterpies, that way I could compare them and get the best. But in the interest of fairness, I decided to pick the first one I saw, which of course happened to be a level 3 Caterpie. Sassy nature, so raised special defense, but lowered speed. Not the best type, but we'll work with it. It became very apparent how weak Caterpie truly is when I was battling against this level 2 Mankey. Not only did it outspeed me, but it did about the same amount of damage that I did it. I barely beat it before having to go back to the Pokemon Center. And this lasted until I was about level 7 or 8, just because of how weak Caterpie truly is. After a bit of grinding, I decided to go into the Viridian Forest, that way I could battle some higher level Pokemon. And I can't believe it, but while I was there, I found a shiny Weedle. I promise you this was not any hacks, no glitches or anything like that. It was just incredible luck. And for me personally, this is kind of a special moment. In all the years I've been playing Pokemon, I think I've only caught one other shiny. So being able to find one for my very first challenge was amazing. I think we just found the second member of our team. I was feeling really lucky at this point, so I decided to do the optional trainer battle against Blue. And to my surprise, it actually went fairly well. I hadn't trained Weedle at all at this point, so I basically had to entirely rely on Caterpie. Pidgey kept using moves to lower my accuracy, but thankfully most of my tackles actually managed to hit. I missed a few against Charmander, but for the most part, he only used moves like Scratch and Growl, so there really wasn't much of a threat. At a certain point, I thought that I might go down, but I got a lucky critical hit, taking out Charmander. Not even need to bring out Weedle. I knew my Pokemon weren't strong enough to beat Brock yet, especially given how high their physical defense is. So my strategy was this. Instead of using Tackle, which is resisted by Rock-type Pokemon, I was going to battle against wild Metapods and Kakunas. That way I could use Struggle, which is typeless. After a little while, I got Caterpie up to level 21, healed him up so that he could use Struggle. I only got Weedle up to level 10, just because I knew that Poison Sting was going to be resisted regardless. So my logic was, he's only going to do 1 or 2 damage per attack. Might as well just have him at a level where he can hopefully survive a Rock Tomb from Onix, but we will see. And it looked like my strategy paid off. Thankfully, Geodude doesn't know any Rock-type moves, so all I can really do is use Defense Curl and Tackle. And then I got an incredibly lucky critical hit right here that thankfully took out the rest of its health, leaving me with 48 HP for the Onix battle, which I knew was going to be the real test here. I immediately decided to switch to Weedle, just praying that I'd be able to get some poison damage off. I didn't really know if he was going to be able to survive a Rock Tomb, and from the look of it, I thought that he was down, but he survived with 3 HP, got off a critical Poison Sting, poisoning Onix, before, inevitably being taken out on the next turn, but I knew I was in a pretty good shape at this point. Onix was taking damage every single turn. I got a critical hit. He did hit me with Rock Tomb 2 times in a row, which was kind of surprising since it has low accuracy, but on the last turn, he was at low health, taking him out, getting us our first badge. I was actually a little surprised. I thought Brock would be harder than this, but given the level gap between Caterpie and Onix, it probably shouldn't have been much surprise. After that, I got my running shoes and began battling as many trainers as I could, mostly because I knew that Weedle was still pathetically weak at this point. There wasn't much to cover in Mount Moon. It was fairly simple. I just made sure to battle every single trainer, as well as wild Pokemon that I could find. I knew that Weedle needed to gain a lot of levels to be competitive, so I made sure to primarily train him. After a little while, I got to Cerulean City. I thought it'd be a good idea to go against Misty just to see how well I'd be able to stack up. Honestly, I didn't expect to beat her. She's very strong and her Pokemon have very good attack power. I got Weedle up to level 18 in Mount Moon, and I got Caterpie up a couple levels to level 23. I decided to battle her just basically to see where I was at, and it went horrible. I started with Weedle hoping to inflict poison damage, which I did, but that's about the only good thing that happened. I switched to Caterpie just for pure power, and one Water Pulse almost took out half my Caterpie's health. After the third one, he was down. I knew I'd lost at this point, but I wanted to keep going. But then one Water Pulse from this Staryu took out 3/4 of my health. Misty healed up, and after that it was completely over. Since it's pretty obvious I can't beat Misty yet, I decided to go against the rival, hoping that maybe I'd have some better luck, but somehow it was even worse. Caterpie did almost no damage, despite being 6 levels higher than Pidgeotto, and it took it out in 3 gusts. I switched to Weedle knowing I had already lost again, and a single gust took Weedle from full health down to 0 instantly. At this point I was kinda stuck. There really wasn't much I could do. There was only one spot I could train, and that was Route 4 just outside of Cerulean. I tried to battle any Pokemon I could, but as you're about to see, that is actually a lot harder. Every one of these Pokemon can hurt me. There are no Metapods, no Kakunas, nothing that doesn't inflict damage. So I was taking damage every single time, and it made this process incredibly slow, especially because I was thinking of using the struggle strategy. Being damaged every single time, trying to use String Shot 40 times, is incredibly hard. A few levels later, I decided to retry the rival battle, hoping that maybe it'd go a little bit better this time, and to my shock, it actually did. Struggle was doing significantly more damage, even though I was taking damage every turn. Pidgeotto still likes to use Sand Attack, which is frustrating, but as long as I'm still hitting, I'll take it. I knocked it out in 4 tries despite my accuracy being lowered. Again, I made sure to switch to Weedle, who had finally been leveled up to a decent point, up to level 20. He sent out Charmander, thankfully it wasn't evolved yet, but he was still faster than I was, almost taking me out in a single hit. But then I got an incredibly lucky critical hit and the poison. And then something kind of unexpected happened. Instead of using Ember again, he used Metal Claw, which left me with 1 health. And so I got off another Poison Sting. He took more poison damage before finally using Ember. I took out far more of its health than I should have, just because of him choosing terrible moves. I switched back to Caterpie, and from there, it's pretty easy. He took a lot of poison damage. Thankfully, I was a little bit faster, getting the struggle off, and eventually knocking him out. From there, the battle was pretty simple. He switched for an Abra, but thankfully it can attack, because it only knows Teleport. So I just took a little bit of damage from Recoil, and knocked it out. His Rattata was a little bit scary, because it knows Quick Attack, which always is given priority. He got 2 of those off, leaving me with 10 health, but eventually I took him out, letting us advance. Although I was a fairly high level when I beat Blue, I was expecting to have to be easily into level 30 or more just to advance, so honestly I can't complain. From there, I basically just battled everyone in this area, making sure to get Weedle just a little bit higher leveled. From there, I made my way into Vermilion City, making sure to battle every trainer there was. I went on to the SSN, versed all the trainers there, and thankfully I got Weedle up to level 28 and Caterpie up to level 30. While I didn't think I was going to win, I thought this would be a good level at least to try. I sent out Weedle first, hopefully inflict poison damage as always, but Gus took out a lot of health. Poison Sting wasn't doing a whole lot, and I thought I was going to be knocked out on this gust, but I held on with 2 health. Switched to Caterpie to save the Poison Sting for Charmeleon. 1 tackle later, Pidgeotto's down, switch back. Got another lucky Poison Sting off. My luck has been incredible with that so far. But after that, tackle is just too weak, and I realized quickly that I was going to lose the round. After that, I decided to train a little bit more, hoping that I'd be just strong enough to beat Misty, and I gave it another shot when I was up to level 32, and it went so much better than the first time. Those extra levels really paid off. Tackle was finally doing some damage. It didn't do quite half, but it was fairly close. This battle is a little bit frustrating because Staryu loves to use moves like Harden and Recover, which just stretch out the battle, but I got a really lucky critical hit once again, sending out Weedle to hopefully deal with Starmie, but it was faster than me despite being 11 levels lower. Water Pulse took out half of my health, and a second one almost took me out, leaving me with 2 health. I was actually feeling fairly confident at this point, because Starmie only had half of its health left, but of course, it was faster than me, got off a critical Water Pulse, almost completely taking me out, leaving me with 5 health, me using Tackle, bringing it almost into the red, but then, of course, the poison damage hurt me in this case, because Misty used a super potion. After that, I knew the battle was over, but of course, it was faster than me one time, taking me completely out. I decided to try again immediately, just because I knew that was incredibly bad luck, and the battle actually went fairly similar to the first try. While I didn't get off any critical hits, Staryu just didn't decide to attack me. As always, I switched back to Weedle, hoping for any poison damage. It still outspeeds me, even though I'm 13 levels higher, but I got the poison damage, was able to survive 2 Water Pulses. I ended up switching out for Caterpie after Weedle fainted. And from there, it was pretty simple. I used Tackle, almost taking it out. I was really worried she was going to use her super potion at this point. But thankfully, the poison was just enough to take it out, which was definitely good because I would not have been able to survive if she would have used a potion there. I then made a beeline back to the SS Anne to retry the rival battle. Honestly, I was fairly confident that I'd be able to win. Just like the Misty battle, I decided to open up with Caterpie instead of Weedle, just hoping that I'd be able to do a decent amount of damage, but Tackle almost did nothing against a level 19 Pidgeotto, only doing about 25% damage. Thankfully got a very lucky critical hit there, otherwise my accuracy would have been terrible. As usual, I switched back to Weedle, trying to use Poison Sting. I tried this battle a number of times, but I for some reason was not able to poison Charmeleon at all. But on this attempt, I got the poison right away. He used Smokescreen for some reason, which was a little surprising. Normally he just immediately goes for Ember. I get off another Poison Sting. Then he finally does use Ember, taking more than half of my health. On a few other runs, he actually knocked me out with a single Ember from a critical hit. But thankfully that wasn't the case on this run, so I was able to take out about 3/4 of its health before Caterpie jumped in and took out the rest. Raticate was a little scary because of Hyper Fang, but it ended up doing very little damage, so I wasn't worried. Kadabra, on the other hand, was a different story. Although its physical defense is poor, its special attack is incredibly good. One more hit would have knocked me out. I got up to level 35, got the Cut HM right after, and decided to head over to Surge's gym to see if I would even be able to compete. I did a little bit of training to get both my Pokemon up to level 37. My stats are terrible, especially the special defense, but Weedle's attack power is getting fairly decent at this point, so I stand a chance. As long as I don't get paralyzed, or as long as I just don't have terrible luck, I should be able to win. Honestly, Voltorb worried me more than his Raichu, just because his Voltorb knows Sonic Boom, a move that always does 20 damage, regardless of how high the Pokemon's attack is. I think this is an incredibly overpowered move, especially for this early in the game. But Struggle was actually doing fairly well in this battle. It took almost half of Voltor's health every time, so Surge had to waste a potion on it, and I got a critical hit, thankfully taking it out before I took any more damage. He sent out Pikachu, but Pikachu is just so incredibly weak. It actually managed to survive, though, and paralyze me, which was frustrating. Then it used Double Team, and I missed. I took him out on the next turn, but not after taking more damage than I would have liked. Surge is just one of those gym leaders who is just incredibly frustrating. I've never found him challenging at all. He's just one of those people who likes to use moves like Thunder Wave and Double Team, which just unnecessarily elongate the battle. I switched back to Weedle for his Raichu, just hoping to poison it. Instead I got paralyzed, and then he used Double Team immediately. I missed a Poison Sting. Thankfully I got the next one off and it got a critical hit, but then he used Shockwave, which took a surprising amount of damage, leaving me with 10 health eventually. I finally got the poison in right before he was about ready to faint. I'm kind of grateful though. I honestly thought he was going to beat me, especially since he would have had the speed advantage there. But anyway, I go on to Route 9, make sure to battle all the trainers there. Again, just like Mountain Moon, there really wasn't much to cover in this area. I made my way through here fairly quickly, and I made my way through Rock Tunnel exceptionally fast. I battled all the trainers in there, but I kind of ran into a problem. I was using Struggle with Caterpie, and that used a lot of potions that I wasn't expecting. Luckily, I stocked up right before I decided to go in there, but even at that, I was down to one single potion by the time I left Rock Tunnel. I was thinking about using it, but it was just too risky at that point. Instead of battling these other trainers around here, I made sure just to avoid them and head into Lavender Town. I made my way into the Pokemon Tower immediately, after getting my Pokemon up to level 40. I knew I wasn't going to win, just mostly because of how bad my special defense is still, but I wanted to give it a try just to see where I was at. I decided to open with Caterpie once again. Struggle was doing decent damage, but not great. He got off a very powerful gust, but I took it out with a lucky crit. I switched to Weedle to use Poison Sting. Got off Poison Sting, got the poison once again. He used Smokescreen for some reason, and then he immediately followed with Growl. I don't know what's with the AI in this game, but they're using absolutely terrible moves. A second Ember would be enough to take me out, but Caterpie was sent out, and thanks to poison damage, he didn't actually have to damage Charmeleon at all. Next up is Execute, and this was an odd moment. Despite being almost double the level, I did almost no damage to Execute, a stage 1 Pokemon who is frankly fairly weak. He uses Hypnosis, which is just an incredibly frustrating move that has high accuracy, and then he used Leech Seed, which drains health from me every single turn. I didn't think I would be able to win this battle, but I never thought in a million years that Execute would be the problem. I finally woke up, but at that point, it was basically over. Struggle was doing almost nothing due to Reflect, raising his defense, and Leech Seed actually ended up healing more than I was doing damage, and even though I got a lucky critical hit, the recoil ended up taking me out, so I knew that I was going to have to grind a lot more before I'd ever be able to attempt this again. I made my way through the Route 8, battling every trainer that I could. I took advantage of the Versus Seeker, which I picked up in Vermilion City, but I actually ran into a unique problem that I've never had before. This couple up here usually is just very easy experience points if you have any type of water Pokemon, but since of course Weedle and Caterpie are weak to fire types, this battle was incredibly difficult. Not only was I doing very little damage, a single Ember was enough to take out half my health for both Pokemon. Thankfully though I was able to just go around them, that way I could pick up the Fly HM, which is going to be very helpful for this challenge. I decided to immediately fly back to Viridian and head into the forest, that way I could battle some wild Kakunas and Metapods. Instead of doing 35 damage with Tackle, I'll be doing 50 damage with Struggle. While this isn't great, it's going to be very helpful. There wasn't much to cover in the Rocket Hideout, so I'm just going to skip to the Giovanni fight. Both my Pokemon are up to level 43 now. While it's not great, I think I'm going to have at least a chance against Giovanni, mostly due to the fact that Bug-type Pokemon resist ground moves. This video is going to be very long, as you're about to see. I started with Weedle, just to inflict some poison damage, and thankfully on the first try, it worked. He started using Bind, and we just kept trading moves back and forth. The damage from Poison and Bind was actually doing a lot more than our actual attacks were, which was kind of surprising. Once again, I just start with Weedle to hopefully get a little poison off. On the second turn it works. Then I switch to Caterpie. There wasn't much to cover, so I'm going to skip through this battle. It just took a long time. For Kangaskhan, I switch back to Weedle with very little health. He gets a Fake Out, almost taking me out, but I got him poisoned on the next move. From there, we basically just exchange blows. Caterpie takes him out, and we somehow beat Giovanni on our very first attempt. Immediately following that, I decided to reattempt the battle with Pokemon Tower against our rival. I was almost 20 levels higher than his Pokemon, but I was still worried that I was going to lose. As always, he starts with Pidgeotto, so I send out Caterpie, hoping to do a decent amount of damage. I took about a third of its health off with a single struggle, but his Gust is still doing okay damage. The second one brings it into orange health, and he gets a Sand Attack off, hurting my accuracy, but on the third attempt, I knock it out. He switches for Charmeleon, so I decide to put in Weedle. Poison Sting hits on the first time, but it doesn't work, but he used Growl for some reason, and then he used Smokescreen once again. Third attempt, I got the poison in. I thought I was going to be able to survive 2 Embers, but on the second attempt, he ended up taking Weedle out. I was kind of nervous, but I knew that I'd be able to knock out Charmeleon with a single blow from Caterpie. If you recall, in the last rival battle, Execute was actually the biggest problem. I still am not doing much damage, despite being almost double the level. But thankfully, Hypnosis just kept on missing every single attempt. 4 struggles later, I knocked it out. Kadabra I assumed would be a one-shot because of his low defense, but it managed to hold on. It used Disable, which doesn't do anything against Struggle. And then Gyarados sent out. It cuts my attack immediately, and I was doing almost no damage, and his Thrash is incredibly powerful. I'm somehow still not strong enough to beat the rival, so I decided to go against the 4th Gym Leader, Erica. Caterpie is level 46, and his special defense is completely terrible. It's equivalent to that of about most Pokemon when they're in the lower level 20s, so I know this won't be easy. But thankfully both of my Pokemon are bug type, so they resist grass type moves, and in the case of Weedle, it actually double resists. Unfortunately though, her Victory Bell always opens with Stun Spore, a move that paralyzes me and virtually ensures that I'm not going to be able to beat her. Thankfully though, along the way I managed to pick up a few berries, one of which I gave to Weedle, which cures paralysis. The other one I gave to Caterpie, and that cures poison damage. I think this is going to be the really only way I can beat Erica at this level, and it instantly paid off with me healing up. She did use a Hyper Potion on Victory Bell, but it just kept missing Stun Spores over and over again. Right before it was knocked out, I got hit again. But considering how many times it tried to use Stun Spore, I honestly can't complain. I then switched for Caterpie to deal with her Tangela. I did this primarily to preserve Weedle's health for its upcoming battle against Vileplume. He managed to hit Poison Powder twice in a row, which is fairly surprising because it has a low accuracy, but I was able to take it out with about half health remaining, switch back to Weedle immediately because it resists the acid because of its poison type. He just kept using acid over and over again, and paralysis was really hurting me at this point, but I got an incredibly lucky critical hit, almost taking it out. Weedle managed to get knocked out because of recoil damage, but from there it was fairly simple. One hit and Vileplume goes down, getting us our 4th gym badge. This was a very easy battle as I expected. When I started this run, this was the only gym battle that I knew I'd be able to do without much problem. I immediately returned to the Pokemon Tower after this so I could reattempt the rival battle once more. I gave Caterpie a berry to hold, that way he could prevent himself from being put to sleep by our opponent's Execute. For this attempt I decided to open with Weedle, hoping that its higher attack stat would pay off, and thankfully it did. Even though Pidgeotto used Sand Attack to lower my accuracy, I was able to take it out in 2 moves. I then switched to Caterpie because our opponent's Execute knows Confusion, a Psychic-type move that is super effective against Weedle. Struggle was finally doing decent damage, but that's because I'm over twice the level of this Execute. But of course, Hypnosis has to hit on its very first attempt, despite the fact that it has fairly low accuracy. But as I said at the beginning of the battle, I gave Caterpie a Lumberry to hold, which immediately cured its sleep status. From there, the battle continued on normally. Instead of using Hypnosis again, he decided to use Confusion, which only does regular damage against Caterpie. I was able to take it out, and then for Charmeleon, I decided to actually leave Caterpie out again, instead of withdrawing it like I normally do. I was only expecting to get 1 hit off before being taken out, but to my surprise, Caterpie was able to survive and do some decent damage against Charmeleon. Immediately switched for Weedle. I knew a single struggle would be enough to take it out. I got a somewhat useless critical hit here. As always, he sent out Kadabra. This thing could have been dangerous, but thankfully it has low defense, so I was able to take it out with a single struggle. And here comes the Gyarados, the thing that ruined my last run. It immediately cut my attack thanks to Intimidate, so I really wasn't doing much damage, and Thrash is just such a strong move. But the following exchange that you're about to see was absolutely incredible, bringing me down to only 11 health. He then got confused, but my biggest fear on the next turn was that my Weedle was going to do so much damage that I was going to knock myself out due to recoil. Struggle hit, bringing his Gyarados into red health and leaving me with only 6 HP. At this point I was just praying that the Gyarados would get confused and hit itself in confusion, and thankfully it did, otherwise I would have been taken out regardless of what move he used. This battle took me about 40 attempts to complete, despite the fact that I was twice the level of all of his Pokemon. So as you can imagine, I was getting really nervous about whether or not this run would even be possible. There really wasn't much else to cover in Pokemon Tower. All the trainers only have Ghastlies or Haunters, which have low health and low defense, so it was basically just a one-shot sweep through all of them. Once I finally got the Poke Flute, I decided to make my way to the 2 Snorlaxes that are impeding the path. Throughout the course of this run, I made sure to capture at least 30 different types of Pokemon, that way I could get the item finder from one of Professor Oak's aides. The item finder was absolutely crucial, because you need it to pick up the game's best held item, Leftovers, which heal your Pokemon by 1/16 of its max health every single turn. I decided to try the Silphco rival battle at this point, after having battled all the trainers in Silphco, just to see where I was at. I didn't expect to win by any means, but it just went so much worse than I could have expected. Our rival was doing so much damage with Wing Attack, a move that's fairly weak. It took out Caterpie with almost no problems, and did a decent amount of damage to Weedle as well. I couldn't even take out Execute, despite being almost level 60 at this point. I knew I was going to have to grind, so I made my way through routes 16 and 17, making sure to battle all of the bikers in that area. While obviously this isn't the best place for EV training, this is the only area where their Pokemon give out decent experience points. All that grinding got them each up to level 65, which I prayed would be enough to beat Koga, the Poison-type gym leader. Unfortunately, I knew I wasn't going to be able to use Caterpie for this entire gym battle. Koga's signature move is Toxic, a status-inflicting Poison-type move, which does more damage every single turn. He'll use it almost every single try if you open with any Pokemon that isn't poison type, so Weedle is pretty obviously going to have to do most of the work here. Coughing is never really much of a threat, so long as it doesn't use Self-Destruct, a move that has base power of 200 in Gen 3. The real issue is his Muck, a super tanky Pokemon with incredibly high physical defense. But that's not what makes this battle so difficult. Instead of using attacking moves, this Muck absolutely loves using moves like Minimize to make it harder to hit, and Acid Armor to raise its already incredibly high defense stat. So yeah, as you could probably guess, this battle took me a lot of tries. You were watching 9 minutes of me trying to hit Muck unsuccessfully until he finally whittled me down with Sludge. I know I can beat Koga, so I decided to try this battle again, hoping just to have a little bit better luck with accuracy. To better my odds of winning, I gave my only remaining rare candy to Weedle, hoping that the slight stat boost would be enough to get me a victory. This battle went very similarly to the last one, with me almost being able to take Muck out before Koga using a Hyper Potion on it. I had to reset the game numerous times when I was attempting this battle because he kept using Acid Armor, which made me do almost no damage every single attack. But on this attempt I was having much better accuracy luck, despite all the minimizes he kept trying to do. But eventually Weedle was able to knock it out with about half of its health remaining. I then decided to switch to Caterpie to deal with Koga's coughing, and to save Weedle's health for the wheezing battle. This decision paid off when coughing decided to use Self-Destruct as I was fearing. I left Caterpie out in the battle, just trying to do as much damage as possible before it was knocked out. I managed to take out about a quarter of Weezing's health before fainting, so I couldn't complain at this point. From there, Weedle and Weezing just kept exchanging blows until, inevitably, I was able to take him out with just a little bit of health remaining. That was by far the most frustrating gym battle at this point. The battle you just witnessed was the only time I was able to get by Muck, and after that it was fairly simple. I spent a few more hours grinding, trying to get Weedle and Caterpie up to level 70. While I didn't necessarily think I'd be able to beat Charizard on this attempt, I thought that being level 70 would at least give me a shot. Things were actually going very well at this point. Weedle was able to take out Pidgeot with a very lucky critical hit. While Weedle did take quite a bit of damage from Wing Attack during this attempt, this gave me a lot of confidence for the rest of the battle. As usual, I switched for Caterpie to deal with Execute. Despite being 32 levels higher than this Execute, I'm doing only about a quarter of its health and damage every turn. It's becoming more and more obvious as this run progresses that Caterpie just simply isn't strong enough to deal with a lot of these Pokemon in the later game, so Weedle is most likely going to have to deal with most of the opponent's Pokemon from here on out. Caterpie was able to knock out Execute, but not before losing a significant portion of its health and getting paralyzed. The rival is planning on sending out Charizard, so I switched to Weedle, just hoping that I can get a lucky critical hit. But that didn't happen, and then I did a depressingly low amount of damage before being taken out by a single Flamethrower that wasn't even a critical hit. On the next turn, Caterpie was taken out before even being able to attack. I don't even bother reattempting the battle. Instead, I head back to CELADON and pick up some fresh waters, which are far cheaper than potions. I then head over to Route 16 once again to battle against these bikers. I want you all to watch this exchange. My level 71 Weedle, which is my stronger of my two Pokemon, is unable to take out a level 29 Grimer in a single attack. Now you all know why this challenge is so difficult, and why it took me so long to put this challenge out. I spent over a month on this project, and most of the time was just spent grinding, trying to get my Pokemon up to a level where they could even compete with their competition. But even at level 75, I was still getting one shot by Charizard. I didn't even bother attempting this again at level 80, so I decided to come back when I got to level 86. Things were going a little bit better at this point. I decided to start with Caterpie instead of Weedle, that way I could preserve all of Weedle's health for the upcoming Charizard fight. I sent Weedle out at full health, but despite the fact that I'm more than twice Charizard's level, I couldn't even take half of its health. He then proceeded to one-shot me with a single Flamethrower. At this point I was getting really worried. I thought I was going to have to be at least a level 100 to see if this was even possible, which would have meant hours more of grinding. But then something interesting happened. Instead of using Flamethrower, my rival's Charizard used Scary Face. Scary Face is a status-altering move, intended to lower your opponent's speed by 2 stages. But more importantly, it has a 10% chance of missing. If I can get a Charizard and it uses this move instead of Flamethrower, I have a chance. On attempt number 58, some truly amazing things started to happen. I decided to open up with Caterpie again, that way Weedle will have as much health as possible for the Charizard fight. Despite being nearly 50 levels higher than this Pidgeot, Caterpie just isn't strong enough to take more than about 40% of its health away from a single hit. Eventually though, he was able to take out Pidgeot without sustaining much damage. The rival then was going to send out Charizard for his next Pokemon, so I decided to switch to Weedle, praying that he uses Scary Face and then I can get a lucky critical hit off. While I didn't get the crit, he managed to use Scary Face instead of Flamethrower. The move was able to connect, so I decided to switch over to Caterpie because I knew that Weedle was going to be slower than Charizard now, and that he was most likely going to use Flamethrower for his next attack. I turned out to be correct, as Caterpie absorbed the Flamethrower for Weedle. Thankfully, since I removed Weedle from battle, his speed stat was reset, so I was still going to be faster than Charizard for the next move. Once again, I wasn't very lucky and did not get a critical hit, but instead of using Flamethrower, he once again decided to use Scary Face. But miraculously, he missed, allowing me to have the speed advantage for the final attack, and without taking any damage thanks to leftovers. This was the first attempt where I was able to beat Charizard, and I actually got really nervous right here, because if I wasn't able to beat his next few Pokemon, I didn't know how many more attempts it would take to beat his Charizard once again. Thankfully, I was strong enough to be able to one-shot both Execute and Alakazam, the latter of which would have been easily able to take me out with a single Psychic-type move. Gyarados worried me once again just because it has Intimidate and it cut my attack, but since I started this battle with a lot of health, I was able to take it out with about half of my health remaining. This was the first attempt where I was able to beat Charizard, and after that the battle went extremely easily. I then immediately proceeded to do the next boss battle against Giovanni, but it was ridiculously easy. I was just way too high of a level for his Pokemon to even handle it. I decided to speed this battle up really quickly just because there wasn't much to recap. I basically just spent about 10 minutes slowly whittling down his Pokemon while he kept using stupid moves like Scary Face and Fury Attack. Even his Kangaskhan wasn't much of a problem. I gotta say, I was almost tempted just to exclude this battle from the video just because of how boring it is, but I wanted to show you guys how truly overleveled I am for this point of the game. Normally your Pokemon's levels would be in the mid-40s at this point, or maybe early 50s, but mine are level 86, so there wasn't even a contest. I then immediately went over to the Saffron City Gym, just to gain a little bit more experience before I faced Sabrina. But Psychic-type Pokemon have notoriously low health and low physical defense, so I was basically able to one-shot everything in here, except for the occasional Drowsy, which might require 2 hits. After gaining a little bit of experience after battling all the trainers, I then proceeded to battle Sabrina herself. None of her Pokemon scare me, except for her Alakazam, which is an incredibly overpowered Pokemon, who could easily one-shot Weedle due to it being part Poison type, and probably could even one-shot Caterpie as well. Even though Weedle has a higher attack power than Caterpie, I decided to open with it, that way I could preserve Weedle's health for the final battle against Alakazam. 1 or 2 psychic attacks from any of her Pokemon could have done major damage to Caterpie, possibly even knocking it out with a critical hit, but Caterpie was actually doing a really great job. Even though his attack power was pathetic, Sabrina's team just has too low of defense and are way too low of level to compete. I honestly didn't think Caterpie would be able to make it through her first 3 Pokemon without needing any assistance from Weedle, but he did an absolutely fantastic job. I even decided to leave him out there against Alakazam, despite fully expecting he'd be taken out by a single Psychic. To my absolute surprise, he survived with a decent amount of health remaining. Since Alakazam's health was in the yellow instead of the red, Sabrina did not use a Hyper Potion on it, and on the very next turn, Caterpie was able to take it out all by itself. It was so nice having such an easy gym battle after battling against our rivals so many times. While on the way to Cinnabar Island, I made sure to battle every single trainer that I found, getting both my Pokemon up to level 90. Honestly, this was a gym battle that I feared most coming into this run, and you can see why when his very first Pokemon Growlithe almost took me out with a single Fire Blast, despite being less than half my level, but my luck was fairly decent on this first attempt. His Ponyta missed his Fire Blast, and then he began wasting Hyper Potions on it, which is very good because I will lose if he uses those on his Arcanine. Blaine then sends out his very powerful Rapidash, which unfortunately does hit me with its Fire Blast, almost taking me out. But a second struggle was enough to take it out. I then switched to Caterpie to absorb Arcanine's Intimidate. Caterpie's attack power was so poor that it wouldn't have done much against Arcanine anyway, and I wanted to make sure that Weedle had his full attack power available for Blaine's strongest Pokemon. While Weedle didn't do much damage to Arcanine, its Fire Blast missed, and I almost took it out, but the second Fire Blast hit, just barely making me lose this battle. I immediately reset and tried it again because I knew I could win if my luck was a little bit better. My strategy was basically the same: send out Caterpie for Growlithe to preserve Weedle's health for those stronger Pokemon. This battle was fairly similar to the first one, with Blaine wasting Hyper Potions on Ponyta. However, unlike the first battle, Ponyta's Fire Blast hit and Rapidash missed, thankfully. Just like the first battle, I switched to Caterpie to absorb the Intimidate, do almost no damage and get hit with Fire Blast, but switch back to Weedle with full attack power. And then, on his very first attack, he took Arcanine from almost full health, all the way down into the red, due to an incredibly lucky critical hit. And then, on the very next move, Arcanine missed its Fire Blast. I was terrified that Blaine had another Hyper Potion that he hadn't used, but thankfully he wasted them both on Ponyta. And since I had the speed advantage and he decided not to use Extreme Speed, Weedle attacked first, knocking it out, and getting us our 7th gym badge. Honestly, this was the gym that I was most worried about coming into this run. I didn't think I'd be able to survive any of his Pokemon's attacks, regardless of what level I was at, so I was incredibly grateful that I was able to beat this after just a few tries. Honestly, the only reason that I beat this gym was because of how inaccurate Fire Blast is. If Blaine's signature move was any other Fire-type move, I probably would have lost. I forgot that on your way out of the Cinnabar gym, Bill tries to make you go to the Sevi Islands with him, but of course I refuse. I don't want to make this run go on any longer than it has to. Instead, I just immediately flew back to Viridian City to handle our final gym battle with Giovanni. I decided to open with Caterpie this time because all of Giovanni's Pokemon know ground-type moves, which are resisted by bug types. While Weedle is also obviously a bug-type Pokemon, it's also part poison-type, which means that ground-type moves are going to do neutral damage against it instead of being resisted. However, as soon as he pulled out his Nidoqueen, I decided to switch for Weedle to prevent Caterpie from getting poisoned. Nidoking did manage to take out Weedle, but it was at such a low health that Caterpie was able to take it out almost immediately. This was actually the first battle in which Giovanni was able to take out even one of my Pokemon. I gotta say, I thought he would have been a stronger opponent. But that being said, I knew I wasn't ready for the final boss battle before the Elite Four. Blue's Charizard is just way too strong. I'm gonna have to be level 100. So I flew back to CELADON to do some more training in my favorite spot. I spent so much time grinding, just going back and forth from CELADON to this area, using the Versus Seeker and battling these trainers, until eventually I got Weedle up to level 100. The stats aren't great, but then I got Caterpie up to level 99, before using my only rare candy to bump him up to level 100. If I could go back in time, I definitely wouldn't have used my rare candies earlier in the game, and would have tried to save them for this late game, because this took so long. But none of that matters now. Now it's just time to attempt the final rival battle before the Elite Four. Just like always, Blue decided to start with his Pidgeot, a Pokemon that knows Feather Dance, a move that drastically lowers your attack stat by 2 stages. Thankfully though, on my first attempt, instead of using that, he just used Wing Attack, a move that is super effective against me. He took out a fairly considerable amount of my health, but after 3 attacks I managed to take it out. Blue then decided to send out his extremely powerful Alakazam, which knows Psychic, which would have easily one-shot Weedle, so I decided to send out Caterpie to absorb the Psychic attack, and thankfully it worked, but Caterpie did take a considerable amount of damage. The next Pokemon up is Rhyhorn. I think if we learned anything from the Giovanni battles, it's that Caterpie actually does fairly well against Rhyhorn, so I decided to leave him out instead of switching to Weedle. This battle took a couple minutes just because neither Pokemon was doing a lot of damage to the other. Even though all of Caterpie's stats are fairly low, its physical defense is passable, so Rhyhorn really didn't do much damage because it used moves like Stomp and Takedown. But up next is the real test, Charizard. It's at level 53, so I needed a miracle to be able to do any amount of damage to it, and somehow I got an incredibly lucky critical hit, almost taking out half its health before a flamethrower was enough to finish me off. Then of course I switched to Weedle, just praying I'd get another lucky critical hit. I knew Weedle's attack power was still not strong enough to take out Charizard without a crit, except unfortunately my luck had run out. I didn't get the critical hit, even though I did take it into yellow health. He then used a flamethrower which took me out instantly. Well, obviously this wasn't the result that I wanted. I was actually feeling pretty optimistic at this point. This is my first attempt at this battle, and I came so close to almost taking out his strongest Pokemon, so I figured if I just tried a few more times, I would be able to win. But I could not have been more wrong. On every single attempt, I would get to his Charizard, and he would use Flamethrower. Over and over and over and over and over again, even though he knows moves like Slash, Scary Face, and Wing Attack, which is also super effective against me. I am not exaggerating when I tell you that I tried this battle 183 different times. And yes, I promise that's the actual number. There was not a single attempt where he used any other moves than Flamethrower. I don't know if that's how the AI is programmed for this battle, or if I just had unbelievably terrible luck, but he wouldn't use any other attacks. I was limiting myself to 200 battles before I was just going to give in and use X items. But then, on attempt number 184, something absolutely incredible happened. Blue once again opens with his Pidgeot, and I found that using Weedle is the most effective strategy here because Caterpie's attack is just way too poor and it does almost no damage despite being double the level of Pidgeot. Thankfully he decided to use Wing Attack instead of Feather Dance. Anytime he would use Feather Dance, I would just immediately reset the game because my attack power would be too low to even do any damage against it. On the next turn though, my luck started to change. I got a very lucky critical hit, taking it from 2/3 health down to 0. I then proceeded to switch to Caterpie to handle his powerful Alakazam. There were a few tries where I decided to use Weedle against Alakazam instead of Caterpie, and unless I got a critical hit, it would always one-shot me with Psychic. But on this attempt, it didn't matter who the Pokemon was. I got a critical hit on Alakazam, taking it out with a single hit, making it 2 for 2 of his Pokemon that had been taken out with a critical hit. I was getting pretty excited at this point. My critical hit luck for the last few attempts had been terrible. I hadn't gotten any critical hits in about 20 attempts. From there, he pulled out Rhyhorn. I knew I was going to be able to beat him one way or the other. Despite my terrible luck throughout most of this run, there was never an attempt where I lost to Rhyhorn. But somehow I get even luckier, getting another critical hit before being able to take it out. That means all 3 of his Pokemon have been taken out with crits so far. Now it's Charizard time once again. I was so nervous, but you will not believe this, but I got another critical hit taking it down almost to half health before, of course, being taken out by a flamethrower. Now, at this point, I was basically praying. I sent out Weedle, begging to get a critical hit or for something good to happen. I waited for about 10 seconds, just because I knew that if I didn't get this critical hit, I was going to lose. But then somehow, it happened. I got the crit, making that 5 crits for 4 Pokemon. That was absolutely incredible luck. I don't know how that happened, but I'm not out of the woods yet. Gyarados does know Intimidate, so it cut my attack, and I was down to fairly low health. Gyarados then started doing Rain Dance to boost its already powerful Hydro Pump. I was literally shaking because I knew I could have lost this battle at any time, and there's no chance I would have gotten this lucky again. But thankfully I finally took out Gyarados, and all that's left is Execute, which only knows Solar Beam as its only attacking move. It managed to paralyze me, but at this point I had already known that I won. I finally did it. I finally beat Blue after so many attempts. I was so happy at this point. I promise there were no cheats or glitches used here. It was just incredible luck. I made a vow when I started this challenge that I would not use X items until the Elite Four at the very earliest, and I almost broke that promise right here. But I managed to get through, got through Victory Lane, and made my way into the Indigo Plateau, home of the Elite Four. I wanted to at least try the Lorelei battle without items, but it went terribly, and I lost almost immediately. I guess that should be expected when you're going up against fully evolved Pokemon with Stage 1 bugs. I decided to fly over to Celadon to pick up some X items, and now we're going to do the real battles against the Elite Four. I started with Weedle because his attack power is already much higher than Caterpie's. Then I began to use the X attacks to boost my attack power some more. Whenever my health would get really low, I would either use a Hyper Potion or a Full Restore to get myself back up to full health. I really didn't want to have to use items in this run, but I just don't think it would have been possible to beat Lorelei without them. Her Pokemon are absolute beasts, with very high defense stat and a very high special attack, which actually became a bit of a problem for me during this run. In Gen 3, X special defense wasn't a thing, so I just had to hope they wouldn't do too much damage. But eventually I won, and then we moved on to Bruno. He's the fighting type Elite Four member, but for some reason he has a pair of Onyxes on his team, the first of which posed a bit of a problem that I wasn't expecting. While I was getting all my X attacks in and doing fairly decent damage, he did a move that forced my Pokemon to switch out, meaning that all of my X attacks would be reset, so I'd have to raise them all over again. While this was obviously very frustrating, it didn't affect the battle too much. All of his Pokemon have amazing physical attack, but their physical defense isn't as good. Surprisingly, Weedle was knocked out of this battle, and it came down to Caterpie versus his final Onix. But with just a sliver of health remaining, I was able to knock it out, defeating our second Elite Four member. Third up is Agatha. Now for this battle, I wanted it to be a little different than the rest of the Elite Four. Her Pokemon are Ghost type, so they have very low physical defense. So I made a rule that I wouldn't be allowed to use any X items in this battle, and that I could only use 1 or 2 full restores. Gengar is a very frustrating Pokemon because it likes to use Double Team a lot, and Golbat actually managed to take out Caterpie because of its wing attack. This battle was significantly harder than I thought it was going to be, especially since I only have Weedle for her final 3 Pokemon, which I would argue are her strongest. Unfortunately, I did have to use a full restore when I was facing off against her second Gengar because it almost took me out, and her Arbok has Intimidate, cutting my attack. But after a little bit, I was able to beat her, beating our third Elite Four member. Next up is Lance, the Dragon Trainer. He starts with Gyarados, so I'm already at a disadvantage because my attack stat is cut. So instead of having to use 6 X attacks, I have to use 7 now. So this process took absolutely forever, and despite all that, I still wasn't able to take him out with 1 hit. Next up is Dragonite, his strongest Pokemon by far. I decided to use a full restore just to get myself up to full health so that I could hopefully survive one of his attacks. But then he used Wing Attack, a move that only does about 60 damage, and he got a critical hit, taking me out from completely full health. This thing is incredibly strong. So after that, I just repeat the process, giving myself all the X attacks, waiting for him to do damage before eventually healing up with a full restore. This was a very long process. This took several minutes, but I finally got through, knocked him out after just a couple hits. He sends out Dragonite once again, get the struggle off. This time he uses Outrage instead, almost taking me out, bringing me down to 18 health. But thankfully on the next turn, since he used a Citrus Berry, Lance didn't use a full restore, and I knocked it out with 12 health remaining. That was incredibly close. After that I used a full restore because Aerodactyl was strong enough to take me out easily from that point. One-shot it though. And then it's just a pair of Dragonairs, which are really easy and there wasn't much to recap, letting us beat our 4th and final Elite Four member. Of course, we still have one more battle, though, and that's going to be against our rival Blue as the champion. The process for this is going to be about the same. I'm going to buff my attack stat and just hope for the best. Thankfully got a really lucky critical hit on Pidgeot. Up next is Alakazam, but I one-shot it due to my raised attack stat. Next he sends out Rhydon, a Pokemon that absolutely loves using the move Scary Face to lower my speed, so I use a Guard Spec to prevent that happening. If my speed was lowered that much against Charizard, it would have been an instant loss. Next out is Charizard, the Pokemon that has absolutely destroyed this run so far. It doesn't quite take him out, but it brings him into low health, and he missed a Fire Blast due to its terrible accuracy. On the next turn though, I knock it out. Now it's Exeggutor, but its moveset is completely terrible. Exeggutor was no threat at all, but his Gyarados actually managed to knock out my Weedle, which terrified me. I then sent out Caterpie and used some X-Attacks to boost his attack. A Hydro Pump nearly took me out, but with just a sliver of health remaining, I managed to take out Gyarados, winning us the game. This was such an awesome moment for me. I had spent so long working on this challenge, doing it for multiple hours every single day, just trying to get Weedle and Caterpie up to the level they needed to be. There were quite a few points in this run where I just didn't even think this was going to be possible. The Silphco rival battle, and especially the rival battle right before the Elite Four, I thought I was done. Obviously, I would have loved to have beaten the Elite Four without using any X items, but honestly, with the rules that I put in place for this challenge, I don't know if it would have been possible. Thank you all so much for joining me. If you like this kind of video, please just give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. It would mean the absolute world to me. I'm trying to start a gaming channel here on YouTube, and I'm thinking of doing more challenges like this in the future. So let me know what you guys think in the comments, and thank you all so much for joining me today. Bye guys.